Hello, everyone, and welcome to Discussing Trek. Today, we're going to talk all about the documentary William Shatner Presents Chaos on the Bridge. I'm your host, Clarence, and with me today, I have none other than my co-host slash Trekkie, starting with none other than Cal Jones. How you doing, man?
You know what? This is 2024, our first episode, and as always, I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you, sir. And also on the podcast today, as always, we have Larry Erby. How you doing, man?
Doing great and happy new year to everyone.
Indeed, indeed. And returning to Discussing Trek, we have Lee Shackelford. How are you doing, sir?
Very well indeed. Very well. I apologize for the crash that you may have just heard. Something fell over in my office, so maybe nobody heard that but me.
Oh, I heard it, but it's okay. It's okay. We're gonna let it ride.
I'm just trying to keep it professional here.
I
Yeah,
thought you were throwing a lawyer out the window,
I
maybe.
was I'm with David Gerald. If I'd been there, I'm not a actually I was there, but I had no idea. So that's
you
the
didn't know
short
about the
version of
chaos?
mine. No.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to get into all of that, and Lee maybe can give us some backstory a little bit later about what you did there
Yeah.
on TNG. In the chat, we have Win Grace. Win Grace, thank you for joining. Appreciate you being here, sir. I don't have any news, so we're going to go ahead and get right into William Shatner Presents in big bold letters. Chaos on the Bridge, which is a 2014 documentary running for about an hour, written, directed, and co-produced and hosted by William Shatner. So that was very fascinating to me to start things off that he had such a heavy hand in it. But Kyle Jones, I think you have some beats for us before we get into the nuts and bolts of this one.
Okay, my beats are really, really simple for this one. But because and I don't want to wait till discussing who, I want to do it on discussing Trek. Can I do a spoiler warning?
Sure, go for it.
So, for anyone listening, if you have not seen this documentary, go to YouTube, watch it, come back, because from this moment forward, spoilers. Thank you, sir.
I guess.
Yes. Who knows?
Yes, there.
But what I do know is beats of the episode, what I took away from it was lawyers are not members of the Writers Guild. There you go. Traditionally,
Well,
not,
some are, but yeah,
but traditionally, I
but
should
he
say.
was not. Yeah.
Some aren't.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you're kicked out, you just find your way back in the fold. That's what I took away from everything. But let's just go around the horn and get everybody's just high level opinion of this what felt like pretty dense 60 minutes of documentary. Larry, what did you think overall of Chaos on the Bridge? And this is your suggestion, actually. I didn't know about this until you brought it up.
Did I bring it up?
I think you did.
I don't know if it was me, but but fine.
Own
I'll
up.
take
Take the
credit.
credit.
Yeah.
But well, I saw this many years ago when it first came out, and there was things that I did not know. I thought it was well done. I thought the drawings and the animation really added a lot to it. And of course, I'm gonna stick up for my man. People say the Berman era. That's Berman and Peeler, the late great Michael Peeler, who doesn't get enough love. But it was a really good documentary.
Kyle, what are your high level thoughts, man?
High level thoughts. I thought it was just off the top of my head interesting that the fact that the captain who was not in it was the captain who produced and narrated and told us the story, with William Shatner. I thought that was really, really interesting. I love pulling back a curtain. Anytime you pull back a curtain, that just fascinates me. So, it could have been pull back the curtain of anything, Voyager or whatever. I would have enjoyed it simply because I love pulling back the curtain. So I know we'll get into some other things, but it was very interesting.
All right, Lee, what do you think, man? And also tell us how you might be closely involved to the shenanigans that
I
were
was
going on here.
I was yeah, I was adjacent for some of this. In the chat, Wingrace is asking, wasn't it a lawyer and the Children Shall Eat? It was. That was famous attorney Melvin Belli, who had no business being in a TV show. But anyway, that doesn't explain why that's such a difficult episode to watch. But anyway, yeah, back in the you saw in the documentary some things about the writer's strike from 30 something years ago. And one of the things that happened as a result of that was that TNG was suddenly back in production and seriously underbanked for scripts. That they had a commitment for another 23 episodes, and nothing had been written in the years before. So that was a big problem. And they sent up a flare and suddenly dropped a lot of the firewalls that keep the common rabble like me out. And my agent, I came back from New York playing Sherlock Holmes in my own play off Broadway, and my phone was ringing, and it was my agent asking me if I would like to go pitch for Star Trek: The Next Generation. So that was a little whirlwind in my life, but that'll be okay. Let's do that. So yeah, before I knew it, I was in that room with Ronald D. Moore, the kid Ron Moore, and Larry Karen and David Carroll and Jerry Taylor, and other people whose names I didn't get, and I would probably know now who they were. But anyway, and I pitched and pitched and pitched ideas, and at one point, Brandon Braga was one of the people there. He told me later on that I had pitched more stories than anybody else.
Oh, wow.
Which I guess is something to be proud of. I mean, they were saying no to them all the time, but still. So yeah, I mean, my writing partner at the time, we had to think up basically a whole season, just to go into the meeting and be ready of stories for Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'll tell you my favorite story about the shortest pitch that I've ever done for anybody ever in my whole career. And it was in one of those meetings with Jerry Taylor. She said, okay, what else you got? And I said, okay, lore. And she said, no. All right,
boy.
moving on. One word.
No love.
No. Which I thought was hilarious then to see him back later, because they said we are through with lore, but apparently not. Anyway, but yeah, one of the things, once I got inside the Hart building and saw that, like any office building, there's a directory out front. And I just looked at all the people's names I knew who were on the list on record. Here's the corner office is Gene Roddenberry. I said, man, we're here. I just want to go in and meet the man. I just want to shake his hand. Talk about people you've ever wanted to just go say thank you to. And I didn't know, but everybody I know, other people who were there and who really, worked on the show in a more meaningful fashion than I did, they say, you did not want to go in and talk to him at this time. You when they say never meet your heroes, this would have been one of those. Yeah, you really would have been anyway. But I've had a chance to talk with David Gerald about this awful time, and this is, even longer ago than this documentary. But and he was saying it was. He said, we try to be respectful because he was the creator of the franchise that we all love. But he said that was ugly, mean, ugly. He said just toward the end, he was not a good man. And that's too bad, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
But and he says, but I did not hold it against him because I know the decline. Everybody can go into a decline as they get older. But that lawyer buddy of his,
oh my God,
that was the peace villain as far as David Gerald was concerned. But
I had never heard of Sir Leonard there. Yeah. It's kind of interesting, just this documentary as a whole, as it kind of, to me, it was almost less about Star Trek and more about Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an opportunity for Shatner as the writer and director of this piece. I hope you noticed that in the credits.
Yes.
That means he can cant the way this is being cut together any way he wants, and he's writing, narration that's stitching it together. He could have made this really salacious. He could have made this really, you're not going to believe what an ass Gene Roddenberry turned out to be. And he didn't do that. And I appreciate that.
Yep. If I could add something here, that was what kind of impressed me about whenever I saw that this was William Shatner presents this story. You anybody can come back in after the fact because you've heard stories about William Shatner's hard to work with.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to have their own spin. Somebody could come back in later and say, "Well, gosh darn it, Kyle was so hard to work with discussing who." You know what I'm saying? Anybody can come back in after the
Right.
fact and repaint it like you said, Lee.
Right.
But it does add a level of respect to treat it with as much fact and let facts make him look ill or good or positive or negative, but just let the facts tell the story.
That's right. I also really appreciated Shatner's total poker face when who was it? It was Rick Berman talking about casting Patrick Stewart and about the fact that Roddenberry was dead set against having a captain who is bald. Cut back to Shatner going,
Oh boy, because we haven't done that before, have we?
no, not on camera anyway. So
Yeah, I will admit he's one of two people that I didn't know was bald, and when I found out, I was shook to the core.
yeah.
Wait,
William Shatner's the first
bald?
one? Come on now, Kyle.
I did not know that.
Get out.
I'm so sorry. I did not know that.
Anyway,
I'm not joking. I
Anyway,
promise you.
yeah.
I did
But-
not know that.
But just
Oh, well.
just as a piece of start, as you say, sort of behind the curtains lore, what do you guys think about this as an hour? Does it do? Is it good for Star Trek to do this for an hour? Or I mean, what was your feeling coming away from it? Do you feel kind of icky afterwards, or do you? Well,
I'll go first. I don't feel like I felt icky, but more so I felt that, man, it's really hard to make a television show.
I hope that's the takeaway.
Yeah. And secondly, if you want to get a little deeper, a creator's handle on an IP, how is it treated? What's the legacy of that? How does it continue? How do you pass the baton? And even, at the core, how do you reboot something that is now beloved? And we have various franchises going through the same thing right now.
So, Larry, what about
That's
you?
right.
Considering
Yeah.
how Trek had started and where it came, what did you think? Curious. Before I jump in,
I absolutely love this documentary, but I will tell you, somebody whose documentary, like Lee said, Bill Shatner could have cut this any way he wanted to. He could have really went after Roddenberry. Well, I'm going to tell you what, Trek Nation is an amazing documentary done by his own son, Rod,
Yeah.
and he does not hold back about his father's shortcomings, the affairs, and just how he treated Majel rather badly.
Yeah.
He treated a lot of people badly. And he's sitting right there with DC Fontaine, God rest her soul, is right there. And she's saying, she says, I didn't like the way he treated your mother, And to me, it makes Gene Roddenberry, it doesn't take away from the great things he did. It just cast him as a human being, flawed. A lot of
There you
people are
go.
full of flaws. They've done great things, but they're human too. They do bad things.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you guys. I will answer your question, Clarence, real quick, which is, it didn't tarnish the reputation of Star Trek for me or TNG for me. And if anything, it endeared me more to it because I have that knack of wanting to know more information, and I love knowing the behind the scenes. So for that, it fed that innate thing that my brain needs. That said, I wonder if the things that Roddenberry did that were considered shortcomings, was that his mind, his ego, his subconscious or whatever working out the quote unquote bad things he did by trying to create this utopian future that was so idealistic, maybe in part saying, let's be everything I'm not. And again, nothing to disparage of his character
Right.
one way or the other, but I wonder if that played, even in his subconscious, anything in what he was doing.
That's an
Maybe.
interesting, yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely something that I think I struggle with. Not just with Star Trek or just with creators and creations in general, whether it's music, movies, because somebody can make something so beautiful that can sound so beautiful, and then you have to reckon with if you go deep enough,
Hmm.
I mean, it's all over the news most of the time anyway. But you have to
Yeah.
reckon with who that creator was, and how do you kind of parse all of that out? I think
Yeah.
it's something that all of us have to kind of look at these days. But I like the beauty in what you said about how he's trying to maybe turn his shortcomings into something beautiful after the fact.
Maybe.
With Star Trek. So I don't know. Good
Well,
thought.
and we heard what Maurice Hurley thought about the utopian view of the future, and
He's a nut.
and I and it reminded me that what I have. This is the original writers directors guide. This is what they gave writers coming in the door, and
Nice.
the and so this is on season 3, and I learned later that several people, including David Gerald and Dorothy Fontana, had been rewriting the writer's guide as they went along. And one of the things that they were toning down was the this is a perfect world of the future. Um, and I can imagine the fights with Gene about that. But that what I thought people like Kyle and me who always want to know more, you might appreciate. Ooh, I meant to put a bookmark in this so I wouldn't be on air fumbling for it. Yeah, page 1 is called "These Are the Voyages." Yeah, here's the mandate for the writers. Number 1, entertain. Isn't that lovely?
That's fair.
Our series takes place at a time when humans can perform wonders, and we want our audience to identify with the excitement of that. We'll travel to strange new worlds, visit new civilizations, use holodecks, transporters, intelligence machines. The list goes on and on and on. But to sum up, it says, and if you get stuck on the science, make it up. The point is here to tell an engaging, exciting story, and don't get hung up on the science. I love that. But the first version of the writer's guide I never saw, but I was told that like on page 1, line 1, it said these people are better than you.
Mm.
Mm.
So that's a little daunting. We're doing a family show here, right? My understanding is that it said they're just like you, only they have their act together. Only it didn't use the word act. I didn't see that with my own eyes. But here's what it becomes by season 3. Our continuing characters are the kind of people that the Star Trek audience would like to be.
Mm.
They are not perfect, but their flaws do not include falsehood, petty jealousy, and the banal hypocrisies common in the 20th century.
Mm.
They share a feeling of being a part of a band of brothers and sisters. And as in the original series, we invite the audience to share in that same feeling.
Nice.
Wow.
It's pretty good, isn't it? I mean,
beautiful.
I don't think that's I don't think that's writing the characters into a corner.
Yeah. And also I said I don't think I knew how much, in this documentary tries to point it out, how much a prolific writer Gene Roddenberry was. I
Yeah.
mean, I was impressed by, taking a script and being able to rewrite it for 2 hours, add a character, and do that in a few days. It's kind of amazing. So I
He
had
was,
no idea.
yeah, yeah. He really was. He was a machine. And he started writing in the golden age of radio. Um, I heard, I cannot remember what the show was now, but I heard, I was just listening to one of those great radio shows because I'm a big fan, and I was just thinking that was a lovely little moral fable in a half an hour. That was great that they were able to really make a point there. And then the announcer said two things that are amazing. It said you just heard this episode, starring so and so, script by Gene Roddenberry,
Wow.
music by Alexander Courage.
Wow.
Well, coincidence or meeting of minds or what? That's interesting.
Like, I want to work with you again.
Yeah. Because so that would have been in the late 50s.
Wow.
But
Interesting.
he was, they mentioned in the documentary, he was a World War II combat pilot.
Hmm.
But somebody who, when he creates his series, he wants somebody from Japan steering the ship.
Hmm.
And I've always thought that probably says a lot about him
Yeah.
right there.
Well, I think it's really cool that you met a lot of these names. Like you said, Roger D. Moore.
Yeah.
Love that man.
Yeah.
Love him. The man, to me, he is another driving force that doesn't get, he and Stephen Stephen Bayer, that doesn't get talked about because Ronald D. Moore committed an atrocity. He was going to bring back My Battlestar Galactica,
Right.
and it was going to be horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible. They're going to have women as different characters. They're going to change it. But here's what happens when you keep an open mind and you look at things.
Yeah.
One of the best shows of all time to me. He
Yeah.
did it, and I love the original and still do, and I adore what he did. So the writing that he and Michael and Ira and a lot of them did on this show, I mean, it still reverberates now,
Right.
over 30, almost 40 years. Are we at 40 years yet? Not 40 yet.
80,
But we're
88,
7.
89, yeah, 87.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting close.
We're getting there.
Yeah. And I mean, still to this day, I mean, these guys, and it is funny to me to hear that, I'm just going to say that it was a shit show
Mhm.
Yeah.
behind the scenes and they were able to turn this out.
Right.
Yeah. Well, they
Right.
speak about how season 1 and 2 are not considered the greatest, I guess. But what did you guys think of the shift in? They speak in the documentary of shift from focusing on story to focusing more on characters.
Mhm.
To me, that's something that I don't know how I feel about that exactly. I feel like there's a balance because I feel like maybe on some shows they focus a little bit too much on character. But did they address that a lot when you were there, Lee? Was that kind of the mandate, or was that even mentioned?
That pivot had happened. And like some of the notes that would go out would say, this season we'd like to do this kind of story. We want to do a story about freedom of speech. Go with it, or something like that. But one note that I remember was, we really want a data story.
Mm.
And I just like, oh boy. Yeah. And the one that I always remember, because my partner and I, we really responded to it, was we want a story where somebody lives a whole lifetime in the course of a day.
Wow.
And we had what I thought was a really solid idea about how to do that, but it was going to be data.
Oh, okay.
From like
But
his memories.
yeah, well,
backups,
it's
his
just like we
memory banks.
thought he's the one who could just have, the positronic brain going in overtime. We just thought that was sort of the shortcut there, right? He's the character from who could do that.
Wow.
But we had him grow old and have a family and and die,
That
and
would
then
never
wake up on the
happen.
bridge.
That
Yeah,
will
that'll
never
never
happen.
happen, right?
No.
So obviously our pitch was not the one that they flew with, but man, am I glad with the one.
Yeah.
Mm.
You know,
I don't know. It's pretty close though.
yeah, well, there are similarities, yeah, but I
You
don't
know,
know. But
the interesting thing that I found just in the, the shift, I'm going to go ahead and ask my question before I forget it because I want to ask this of you guys after I finish, which is when you go back and you think of the episodes that you watch of TNG, if you just were to go back and watch, are they in season 1 and 2? Are they in seasons
mm,
3, 4, 5, 6, and
yeah,
7? I'm curious to know after I say what I'm about to
mm,
say next. But I find it interesting that in the 2020s, that in the last couple of years, we've had conversations about, oh, well, we really kind of would rather have a more episodic type show as opposed to a character that we've seen in Discovery and other things. So and I think Clarence, I think it's what you said a minute ago, which is it's that happy medium between episodic and character driven. And I think Strange New Worlds has effortlessly and purposely balanced that really
yeah,
well. But I'm curious, back to
agree.
my question though, is what do you guys go back and watch? Are they in seasons 1 and 2? Are they in the later seasons?
Uh, Take it, Larry. You go ahead, Larry.
Um, for me, I watch all of Next Generation because I will tell you this: um, the early seasons, while we can look back and say they may have had problems, they were good. They were good enough to keep the show afloat. They
Yeah.
were engaging. I mean, yeah, it's easy to look
Mhm.
back now and try to pick the yes, season two finale was just a bunch of cutscenes
Yeah.
from other stuff. I get it. But the when they hit season three, that's when they hit their stride.
Mhm.
And like I said, I can go back right now and watch Encounter at Farpoint, and I can still feel like at that time I was 19 years old, and it still gets me kind of giddy.
Yeah.
Lee, I have a question for you.
Mm.
If you, because I know you are a big fan of the original series, so not putting you on the spot for the original series, but
You
had
can.
this been Star Trek 2,
Yeah.
meaning you did have Kirk, you did have Spock, you did have McCoy, you did have this is the continuing story of
Mhm.
Star Trek, their second 5-year mission or whatever you
Right.
want to call it. Do you think we would have still had the franchise Star Trek now as we know it, or do you think it would have people would have just said, "Oh well, been there, done that," and might have withered on the vine?
Well, that's a tough question because just think of the chronology. We did have the original cast movies going on
Yeah. Yeah.
at this same time, so in a way, we were having it both ways.
Yeah. Oh man. What a
Um,
time.
yeah, um, but I think a lot of people felt that the original series characters they could start to finally feel them getting long in the tooth,
Yeah.
and yeah, I and Star Trek Five I think finished it off for a lot of people. They just threw up their hands and said, "Okay," you know,
Which is
I
the one with
remember
the
seeing
whales?
that.
Is
yeah,
the whales 5?
No, that's
that's
four.
four.
Okay.
No, let's find God and then kill him. That's five. Yeah, But,
You know, William Shatner. I actually saw him live. I actually got to meet him,
mhm,
and I remember him on stage talking about how you start out, and Lee probably knows this. You start out with this,
yeah,
and then it gets whittled down to, well, I want this, this, and this, and this. Yeah, this is what we can give you. Well, I
mhm,
want all these special effects. Well, yeah, you don't have the budget for
right,
that. Well, I want this, and this will be really cool. Yeah, you don't have the budget for that either.
Hmm.
Well, what do we have the budget for? And he
Right.
said they gave him, he wanted these people to become giant rock monsters or
Hmm.
whatever. And he thought that would be cool to engage the crew. He said they had a guy come out in a suit. It looked terrible.
Hmm.
And he's like, okay, just forget it. And
Yeah.
they did a rewrite in 3 days to what we got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And it is, and he's right, of course, that always happens, no matter it doesn't matter what the production is. There are compromises. But my problem with 5 is that the problems are on paper. And what I tell my students and everybody else is solve your problems on paper. Paper's cheap, you
Yeah.
know. Go to the set with the best script that you can, and then we can start making compromises. But don't compromise on story, plot, and characters. And 5 kind of does, and so it's I feel like it's doomed from the beginning. But I don't know anyway. But I know there are people who really love that movie, and more power to them. And
I like it to a
Star Trek
point.
6 is still in the offing. It's still possible. But
5, I will say, I love the thing of bringing Cybok out, which I love the fact that we revisited that on Strange New Worlds, because I
Mhm.
think his name was Lawrence Bucknell. Am I right? Who was
Luckenbill, yeah.
Cybok?
Hmm.
He turned in a phenomenal performance. I liked
He's
him.
great. Yeah.
But the thing that got me, and this goes back to the documentary about rewriting stuff, is it was cool to have a Vulcan with emotion.
Hmm.
And apparently that wasn't in this documentary, but in one of the other documentaries, Gene Roddenberry talked about having, I think, not he talked about it or he brought it up, or either Dorothy brought it up about having a group of Vulcans who didn't subscribe
Hmm.
to logic.
Yeah. Yeah,
Which
Steinbach's laugh is is the to me the icon of Star Trek 5. That's what I always remember when I think about that film. I think about what's going on here. Yeah. So
Yeah, I want to go back to writing for just a second here. 30 writers turned over in the first season. That is nuts.
yeah.
And then there was also this concept brought up, which I'd never heard of, jumping credit and script arbitration. Me
Hmm.
not really being in that sphere, never heard of those terms before.
Yeah.
But, Gene just took a script and doctored it up, put his name on it, for
Right.
it as his own.
And Dorothy made a point of mentioning the story. Well, I think David Gerald did too, about Gene insisting that he write 30 minutes of this now 2 hour, the two-parter Encounter at Farpoint. That's not an accident. Once you've written a certain percentage of the script by union rules, your name has got to go on it.
Mm.
So, and that's incidentally why my name isn't on Ship in a Bottle, which I pitched, and that's what they bought. But by the time it had gone up the ladder and everybody had written on it, I don't know if there's a single word of my script left in it. So I don't even get a story, but I don't have any credit on it at all. But that was my episode, to start
But
with.
but based
But
on the quote unquote rules and guidelines, it could have been if I'm hearing you right, it could have been your idea. You could have said we're going from point A to point B,
uh,
and they could have gone from point A to point B, but your words weren't
right,
there.
right.
Mm.
That's
Let
right. It literally comes down to being able to count words, and it's you could say it's a vicious and unfair system, but nobody's ever thought of a better one.
Yeah.
You know,
so
and I always want to say, when I bring this up, when anybody's talking about this, Rene Echevarria was the head writer that season of Ship in a Bottle, and he's the one who had the final pass, and so his name is the only credit on Ship in a Bottle, and I say more power to him, because everything that he did in that script, I think, is brilliant. They did not, especially, they did not use my ending, which I am now embarrassed by. But the way he ended it, I think is freaking genius. So anyway, that's my story about Ship in a Bottle. But yeah, I do still like to say, like, I got Moriarty out of the holodeck. That's
I have a question.
I
So
can't
they
prove it.
don't have to they didn't have to compensate you in any way? I mean,
Only if what survives is a sufficiently large part of what I wrote. I was expecting story by credit, because I expected it to be massively rewritten, but by the time we got to that point, it wasn't even really the story that I'd started out with. That's what
Wow.
greenlit it. That's what got it all going. But and I spent some time saying poor me, and they're a bunch of thieves and pirates. But this is just how it works. And again, it can be mean and it can be cruel, but it's also, nobody's thought of a better way.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
that's the common practice still, or
yeah, that's how it works. If you have a room full of writers, somebody says, "Hey, I've got a great idea," and everybody says, "Great." Then you point to somebody else and say, "You write a first draft of it." Well, if their first draft veers very far from what was just pitched in the room, then that person who brought it up,
But
they're now out of the equation.
speaking of pitches, and shameless
Mm,
plug here, just because
yeah,
I want to, that experience right there helps shape the writer you would become, who would then be today, years and years later, writing scripts for a soon-to-be ITV series called A Train Near Mandiburg.
that's right.
And you
And
can
my
find out more
multiple award winning,
information. Yes, and multiple award winning Relativity,
right,
at relativitypodcast.com. And it's what is the website for A Train Near Mandiburg?
magdeburgtrain.com.
Thank
That
you,
only
sir.
works if you know how to spell Magdeburg, but yeah, look for it. But yeah, it's true. Everybody's got horror stories of their childhood, of their young writerhood, except I think David Gerald, who is still, he's 80 years old. I mean, I had to do the math, but we're talking about how long ago the original series was. I mean, he was a kid when he wrote. He was right out of college when he wrote Trouble with Tribbles, and he's kind of been dining out on it ever since. But even today, he looks back and he says that was such a fluke. So many people, come around with a script in their hand and they just get it taken away from them and they get beaten up. And he said, I was famous overnight, that I wrote this episode that turned out to be so popular. And then suddenly everybody, wanted to shake my hand. And Ron Moore did exactly the same thing. He came around there without an agent, with a script in his hand. And he said, "Hey guys, anybody want to see this?" And he was there at the right time. And yeah, and not too much later, as you say, Larry, that he's saying, now that I've seen how you take an old TV series and make it newer and better, I think I could do it. I'm going to go over to Universal and pitch this.
those guys are like Brandon Bryan.
Hmm.
The show he created after Enterprise was Threshold with Brett Spiner and the futurely famous Peter Dinklage
That's right.
and Gina. I always butcher her last name, but we all know who she is from the son-in-law, and she was in the movie with Dwayne Johnson. But anyway,
Yeah.
that was a phenomenal show. It only lasted one season, but damn it, these people on this show have proven beyond Star Trek, The Next Generation, and Star Trek, they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, getting back to the title of this doc, chaos. I would never have imagined the conflict between the person who imagined all the Gene Roddenberry, the rest of the writers, the network, the syndicators. It's just everywhere is pulling pulling for resources, pulling for writers, pulling for control. It was just a madhouse. And then you get to the the actual actors, casting of the actors. It just all continued. So yeah, just never would have imagined there'd be so much trouble and tribulation on a show like this. It's really phenomenal that they got, like you said, Larry, earlier, that they got anything made.
Right. Especially so many, Emmy-winning hours of great TV. But
Yeah.
what do
What
y'all think about the country music in this documentary?
I thought that that was intentionally done, considering that Roddenberry originally wanted this to be like a space western. I thought that
Oh,
was just a
Mm.
behind the scenes little jab at that. And was I
hmm.
right there?
Nah, I
I thought they were just trying to make it lighthearted.
But then
yeah,
again,
I thought it was just to make this funny, and
and
yeah,
didn't Shatner also make a country music album?
He
oh,
has. Yeah.
he's
So
recorded across the spectrum, yeah. But
so
I
maybe
just got
that
the
was a little
feeling it's sort
self
of like
promotion.
they were sort of suggesting that behind the scenes TNG was the Dukes of Hazzard. Um, and I don't know. I thought it was funny. I'm like Larry. I think this would be a completely different documentary without those drawings and animation, because some of the funniest just sort of sight gags are just
But if
it's
you
very
think of
clever.
any television show that's really, really popular as the years go by, and I'm not lessening what we're talking about. Obviously, we're sitting here talking about it, but I'm sitting here thinking of like Three's Company and all the back drama that was in Three's Company, from the Ropers leaving till Mr. Furley, the actors, and then they getting their spinoff and not being able to come back, and then Suzanne
Yeah.
Summers, blah 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 blah, then Dallas, and then Designing Women. All these different TV shows that there's backstage drama, and then there's this great television that
Yeah.
is the result of that. So my point is, anytime you get a bunch of human beings in a room together, there's going to be drama behind
I,
the
I
scenes
think
and
that's
in front of the scenes.
and in this case it was just more so. It was
Yes.
just the usual, just raised to a certain power. Yeah.
I was gonna say, something unique, and Lee probably knows more, but certainly more than I do about. But don't you think Next Generation changed the shape of, like, after Next Generation? You, not even counting Star Trek shows, you saw a ton of TV shows right into syndication
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
back then. I can think
Oh,
of,
right.
the Hercules and
Hmm.
the Xenas, and that was even later. But you started seeing a lot of shows going directly into syndication, which was
Right.
unusual.
No,
If
you're
they can
exactly
do it,
right.
we can do it too.
This proved that it was possible. And I think if you watch this documentary, you say anybody who was there would say, no, don't try this. this is this is so treacherous. But then another Star Trek show, they would say, let's launch an entirely new syndication system. Let's launch a whole new network and put it on the back of Voyager. Okay, go.
Oh,
Mm.
I, you know,
Terrible.
so that's almost like the ultimate. But yeah, it's amazing that worked.
and they
Amazing.
did it twice,
And they did it
because was it
twice.
Enterprise?
Yeah.
Was the same situation.
Mm.
So I don't know. It's all terrifying.
Well, let me say this in regards to TNG. And I know this is blasphemy, so any Star Trek fans out there listening to this, please forgive me. I was not a fan of the original series as a small kid. I was 4 years old, 3 years, 4 years old, going to see Star Wars, and it was Star Wars. That
Yeah.
was my thing, Star Wars. And then here came along the next generation that wasn't these 1960s TV shows that I didn't really have an affinity for, but something I could latch on to that was current, quote unquote,
Mhm.
current production, new.
Sure.
This was not them, but yet it was, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
don't think I would have been a Star Trek fan like I am today had there not been the next generation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, yeah, it's a miracle they made it work. Let's take an older show, let's update it for a new generation, and I mentioned it up top, but we've seen many times where this has not worked. you know,
Oh my God, it's
Right.
not working right now for a bunch of shows
yeah,
Yeah.
that
yeah,
they're just kind of, as the old saying, they're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
And right now, retro is the thing.
yeah indeed.
Yeah.
Let me pick up a quick comment here from Win Grace. And if I hadn't acknowledged everyone in the chat, what's up? Win Grace, Marge, Tasha, thanks for being here. In the comment to season 1 episodes Cal made earlier, when Grace is saying maybe the battle, the Binar episode, Datalore, and the big goodbye. I really liked Armus as a kid, but Skin of Evil isn't actually a great episode, Lo. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there's some gems in there, despite everything we've been saying.
Really quick, Marge says "Ship in a Bottle" is a great episode, and also TNG is my comfort.
Yeah.
Indeed.
I
So
get, I,
guys,
I'm
go
gonna
ahead,
brag
Larry.
about this. I'm gonna be like, yeah, I know the man who originally came up with that concept. So there.
That's right.
But I was gonna say, when you said that, Lee, the music industry that happens probably even more all the time. It's like,
Right.
well, wait a minute. I wrote this little piano part
Yeah.
here, so
Yeah.
12% of that is mine.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. No, you're right. If there's any place where that happens nonstop, yeah, it's got to be the music industry. Yeah. So,
Yeah, guys, and with that, we'll go ahead and begin to wrap this up. Any closing thoughts from anybody? If not, go ahead and give a shout out to whatever you might be working on that you'd like to plug right real quick.
All right.
We'll
Well,
start with you, Larry. Well, go ahead, Cal.
no. I do have two closing things that I wanted to before you do the wrap up. Just hearing Patrick Stewart tell the weatherman story was just hilarious. With him talking about, I walked in and then I walked out and said, "Bleep." That was cool, and I found it interesting that DC Fontana, I did not know or did not remember that this writer was female, and I'm curious if that was done in intention
It
at the
was.
time. It was.
It
absolutely.
was.
Yeah.
It was. I have a book on her, and that was why she went with DC
DC.
instead of Dorothy
Mm.
at
As
that
a lot
time.
of female novelists did as well. So, yeah.
Yes.
So
And, and let me mention real quick, such a travesty to what they did to the classic writers that came aboard that to try to foster on this new Star Trek. They just kind of crapped on them. It was really tragic.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that seems to have been a tradition of Gene's. So he just brought that over from the original series. I got to work with George Clayton Johnson, who, Logan's Run and, a million other things, Ocean's 11. Yeah. I wanted to talk with him about the fact that he wrote the first aired episode of Star Trek. He wrote The Man Trap. And that was the wrong thing to say because he's passed now, but 60 years later or whatever, he's still mad because his script was, yeah. Anyway, but he says, Roddenberry got a hold of it, and by the time it's over, it's it's nothing like but it's got my name on it. Whatever went out there, it was all
Well,
Gene Roddenberry, but it says George Clayton Johnson on it. So.
he got that. Well, at least he got that.
He did, and he got paid. And a lot of people would say, "Well, what are you complaining about?" But he wanted them to do his episode, and Harlan Ellison's written a whole book about that. So, yeah.
You guys maybe think about in the documentary where I think it was Maurice Hurley. He wrote an episode and Gene Roddenberry was mad at him. You do not know how to use deflectors or something. He said,
Yeah, you don't know a shield from a deflector. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I will stick with that for the rest of my life. That I don't think people get plot device. You know what they are, Kyle. Clarence, you know what they are, and Lee certainly knows more than any of us about that. When people go, "Hey, how does the ship stop and take off and everybody doesn't splatter?" inertial dampeners.
Inertial dampers. Yeah, we all know
But how
that.
do they work, inertial dampeners? But what do they do? Inertial dampeners. That's
Right.
all we need to say.
And what does the Lee? What does it say in the writer's guide about that? Forget the
Well,
science.
like I said, don't just tell an entertaining story. And I have an example in here. One of the early scripts, and I can't remember which one it is, they mention in the hull there is a metal called selenium. And when you see it in print, it is literally the word meaningless spelled backwards. That's selenium. Yep. Yeah, I was just reminded you were talking about things like that. That they gave us the whole technical manual too, because you don't want to go into the presence of the producers not knowing the difference between shields and deflectors, right? And one of my favorite things to look back on this now, because it seems kind of sweet, was that they mentioned that the Enterprise's computers. This is 400 years from now, of course. So we're no longer measuring storage space in gigabytes. The Enterprise computers measure their memory in terabytes.
Ooh, we'll never touch that.
Yeah.
I remember that. I mean, good Lord, I've got a 3 terabyte sitting right here by me
Exactly.
right now.
And you,
Doesn't
my
that seem
friend,
sweet
are
to be-
proof that time travel exists.
There you
You're
go.
from the future.
Mm.
Aim high, guys.
Lee, anything you want to plug or last shout out before we get out of here?
Oh, Kyle's already done my my baseline plug, but I did want to mention that I think my favorite thing in this documentary is Shatner barefaced pretending like he didn't cut up and clown around on the set of.
Oh yeah.
Right. And,
Whatever
and,
do you mean?
And John Frakes calling him out on it. I
He
just
had some
love
of
that.
the best bloopers. I don't know what he was like, and I know they said he was a pain, but Shatner had the best bloopers.
Yeah.
He was hysterical.
He was a clown. And yeah, Leonard Nimoy, I mean, he says in his last book, he says, sometimes I just couldn't stand it anymore. I just wanted to get the work done. And Bill, we just wanted to clown around and joke. And I'm like, can we just get the shot, please? Anyway.
I definitely see Patrick Stewart, the classically trained actor from overseas. What is going on here?
Yeah.
These goofballs.
Is this how you do it here? Yeah. Well, and he's accustomed to things like the way they shot Doctor Who back in the day, is that we're going to do it all, and we got 2 cameras, and we're shooting it all, as if it was live, and there is no time to fool around.
Get it done.
You get in there, say your lines, and get out of the way. And yeah, he must have thought, I don't know. Anyway, but he lightened up.
Cal, did you give your plug, sir?
Sure. If you are a Doctor Who fan, you can also check us out at discussingwho.com. And if you're listening to this and you are a fan of sci-fi, you can check Lee and I out on Oz9 at oz-9.com.
All righty, and I will say thanks to each and every one of you guys for being here. I was thoroughly entertained. I don't know about you guys. I just sat back and I was just, let it rain over me. The knowledge is really good, and overall, really enjoyed this documentary. So maybe we can find another one sometime in the future to talk about, because this one was just very informative. Some stuff I really did not know about Gene Roddenberry. And with that, guys, thanks to everyone in the chat, and we'll end it right here. Until next time, live long and prosper.
There we go.